Let's unbox the Black Series 6-inch figure of Luthen Rael from Andor Season 1. Varykino. If it's Star Wars, we collect it. Hello there, thanks for visiting Varykino. I'm sure I'm not the only collector that likes to display my Star Wars action figures clustered and grouped by source material like a movie or series. So when Andor came out, I was really looking forward to eventually clearing some space in my collection and making a dedicated space for my Andor series. Now of course you don't want to clear too much space until you've got at least a few figures to fill it. And sadly we just have not had as much merchandise from the fantastic Andor series as I would have liked. I was kind of holding out for Hasbro to release a few more before I finally made space, so a lot of my figures sat in their packaging while I waited. And you know what? It's obviously going to be a while before we get a lot more, and I really want to get them out of their packages and on a display. So I'm done waiting. It's time to open them up. I recently opened up the SWTOR Funko Pop vinyl figure. That was really fun, and I'm going to keep the Andor fun going with a Black Series of Luthen Rael. I'm really excited. He's in the plastic-free packaging era, so I haven't even laid eyes on this figure. Really excited to take him out, so thank you so much for hanging out with me today. Coming up really soon, I'll finally open up this figure. We'll get him out, check out all of his details and accessories, but first, let's take one last look at the packaging. Many of the Black Series 6-inch figures from the Andor series were released during the thankfully short-lived plastic-free packaging experiment by Hasbro. So instead of a window on the front of this box, we simply have an image here of the action figure inside. We have a really nice gloss image here of the action figure, but it's no substitute for a window to display the figure, especially if you like to keep your characters in their boxes. You just can't see it at all and you really can't tell what's inside. I'm really glad that was short-lived and we are back to windows. Even though the packaging has actually changed again since this, we've now got squared off edges. So for the Andor series, we have this really bright orange color, which is really quite fun. We've got that for the accent stripe underneath the main image here on the front, Star Wars Andor, and we've also got that color used for the character plate here, Luthen Rael. Coming on to the side, we have some fantastic art. Sometimes the art isn't a true likeness for the actor, but I think this is just a fantastic rendition of Stellan Skarsgård, who of course played Luthen Rael in Andor. I love his character. He had some memorable moments and I really like the likeness here of him on the side. We can see he is holding a sort of secret weapon here. It looks like he is pulling a knife accessory out of a sort of hidden compartment here. I think that that's fun because he has a slightly less action-centric role in the show. I like that they've still given him something to hold, a sort of a weapon there. And of course we've got that accent color coming in strong on the underside here. A little bit more of a red tone coming in here compared to that stripe on the front there. And we've got the name Luthen Rael printed in black down the bottom there. Moving on to the back, we've got that orange stripe across the back. Of course, this is number 6 from the Black Series line of figures from the Andor series. And we usually have that character art here on the back, but because this is a plastic-free packaging one, again we have a gloss image of the action figure posed here with an accessory visible in the hand, and again it's a gloss finish against the matte finish there of the main box. We do have a blurb here, but it's a little bit more about the series than the character itself. In an era filled with danger, deception and intrigue, Cassian Andor embarks on a path that will turn him into the rebel hero who will challenge the evil galactic empire. So nothing about Luthen Rael, and I do think it's a shame. I know it's probably done to avoid spoilers, but I just think it would help to really explain the characters that are attached to the figures here. So of course the rest of the packaging, we've got the barcode, copyright, all of that kind of stuff. And on this side panel, I quite like this. This is one element of the plastic-free packaging I do like. We've got a nice straight image here of the Black Series figure inside. We have it noted how tall it is. In this one it is 6.2 inches or 15.8 centimeters, and we can see a nice clear image of all of the accessories that come with it, which is a handy reference if you like to take your figures out of the packaging. Once they're on the shelf, I sometimes get nervous that I will forget the accessories that came with each figure. This is a nice handy reference, though of course it is more to show what is inside the box because we simply can't see it. And of course, we've got that plastic-free packaging note there in a few different languages. Now on the top, the standard Black Series boxes that did have windows here also had a window at the top, which I find actually collects a lot of dust for me personally. So I actually liked just this flat surface, much easier to keep clean and tidy, because of course we don't need light to let in because we've got no front window. But that was one of the few things I really did like about these ones. The cardboard hangers at the top I found were very easily damaged compared to the plastic ones of the standard line. But overall, it looks kind of cool. Of course, it's very much of a shame that we can't see the figure inside, especially if you like to line up all of your Black Series mint in their boxes. You can't see it, so you may as well just have an empty box. But as you can see, I've never opened mine. I'm done waiting. I'm definitely keen to get this one open and finally see him in person. So I'm going to open my box up from the underside by just carefully snipping through the tape. Sometimes I find that when I open up the top, that top flap never closes quite right, and you can always kind of see it when you've got the boxes displayed on the shelf. When it's tucked in on the underside, you never really see it. So let's get stuck in and get this open. Of course, we've got the little bits of paperwork. I always think it's interesting seeing how Hasbro packaged these plastic-free packaging ones, because of course they're not in the plastic trays. So let's see if I can slide this out. Okay, it's actually quite a heavy one. We can see there we've got the cardboard insert here. We have a little bit of a paper envelope here with the accessories, and wrapped up like a mummy we have the figure, and we can see that the tissue paper even has Star Wars the Black Series printed on it. So just going to get all of these pieces out of here. So I'm just going to carefully snip through these cardboard ones from the back. I do try and avoid getting any kind of cutting implement like scissors as far away from action figures as I can. I don't want to risk accidentally scratching the paintwork or damaging the plastic. But here we go. He's quite heavy, I have to say. Sometimes when you're holding the box of a figure, you can't tell what the weight is of the figure itself versus just the overall packaging. So this is quite fun. It's like wrapping a Christmas present. Okay, here we go. Oh, and it's tucked under his jacket. That's interesting. Okay, tucked quite in there. Now, here we go. Okay, so one thing that I really noticed about the plastic-free packaging one is they just kind of wrap them up. They don't make an effort to make everything really straight, so they often look a little bit bent, and it kind of gives me a moment of panic, like something's broken, because everything just looks a little bit off. But I can see that we just have the jacket sort of turned a little bit here, so it's just going to take a moment of kind of getting those pieces there straight. And of course the ankles will need a bit of a tweak and stuff like that. His head's a little bit twisted and things like that. But yeah, he's looking cool. I can see why he's so heavy. We've got this huge big plastic coat. Okay, so let's clear all the rest of this packaging away that we don't need, and let's go over all of the details in more detail. So now I have all of that internal packaging out of the way, but in my excitement, I didn't actually open up the small little envelope containing the small accessories. So let's open this one up. I usually go straight into the action figure, but I need to get these accessories out, of course. So we've got his little sort of staff weapon, short staff, that's got a hidden blade and a small blaster pistol, of course. So we'll go over those a little bit in more detail later. Just going to pop those off to the side because I really want to take a look at this figure. So one small thing to note, he came out of the box a little bit sort of twisted and not sort of straightened up. So I did straighten up his sleeves and I did tweak something. The little neck piece, you could see by the collar, it was kind of twisted to one side. So just doing a little bit of a careful tweak, I was able to slowly sort of turn his neck to get that collar detail sort of aligned up here. Of course, we've got this sort of little dip here at the front of the collar, and I wanted to get that in the front to kind of line up with the shirt detail. So I was able to do that. I was a little bit worried when I saw that. It kind of looked like his head was a little bit twisted, but that was an easy fix. So of course, it's really fun getting to really hold the figure and get the feel of the weight of it. And just for a little bit of a preview, you can see the shape of his pants. They're kind of balloon out. They are not fitted pants. So because they are bulky, that gives them a lot of weight, and he actually feels like quite a heavy figure. Of course, he's a pretty sort of standard human in terms of his proportions and stuff like that. He's not a Wookiee, he's not a Darth Malgus, but he's got a certain weight to him, and I'm hoping that he's not going to be too hard to sort of pose. Now, of course, course, he's not quite as sort of actiony. He's not flipping around with a lightsaber. So I probably am not going to be too worried about how well I can pose his lower half, especially because we've just got a lot of plastic around his body. I feel like we're going to need him fairly upright to keep that balance, or else he's going to tip over because we've got this big plastic jacket on him as well. I am going to want to pose his arms a lot because we've got some accessories to hold, and I think that's where I want to sort of get a little bit of posability, because he looks, because the sleeves kind of hang straight out, he looks a little bit awkward just with his hands down. Some characters, their arms can sort of hang a little bit closer to the body, but his are on quite an angle, so it looks just a little bit awkward. And personally, I like it when this kind of articulation point, these joints are a little bit more hidden towards the back, and we tend to get that on these big draped sleeves when we can sort of pull the sleeves up a little bit, where you can sort of hide it a little bit more towards the back, of course. But let's check out the details. So of course, we can see he's got a very large plastic green jacket here, and so I just want to quickly test, because sometimes I'm not sure if I want to pull it all the way off, but I'm just going to see how well we might be able to remove this big jacket. Okay, so I can actually kind of slip it back over the shoulders, but the width of these sleeves here, I think that's going to be a bit of a tight fit through there, and you can kind of see when I take that back off his shoulders, it's not really designed, and nor is the costume designed, to sort of have this main vest section of the jacket be separate. These sleeves are supposed to be sleeves of the jacket, so it's kind of going to look a little bit odd if we take them off, but I might just kind of move it a little bit to the back at times just to show some of the details that are hidden underneath. But personally, I'm not going to remove it. I do like how nice and tight that plastic sort of vest part is around the shoulders. Sometimes you can kind of get this big gap and it kind of just looks like a vest, and then these weird sleeves that are not attached, because you can see some of the details in different colors through at the shoulders, but that's a really nice sort of meeting. I can only just see through. If I kind of move it around a little bit, I can just make out some of the plastic in there at the shoulder, but on the whole, that is sitting there really nicely. There is just a really, really subtle color difference on my particular figure, and I kind of expect that on something like this, because these sleeve details here are part of the arm, so they are cast in a hard plastic, whereas this part is part of that sort of that rubbery, more flexible plastic. So it can be very hard to get an exact match in color tone and sort of texture between two different materials, but it's only really noticeable when I'm looking at it close up and for a while. If I'm just sort of looking at the figure front on, it looks pretty cool, and that's a pretty close match for the color there. Just under certain light, I can just sort of make out that the sleeves just look a tiny, very slightly lighter than the main body here. But this is a fantastic jacket. It's always an interesting sort of time when you see these sort of large cloaks, jackets, and things like that. I often wonder, you know, when I see the characters on screen, which method Hasbro is going to use for the action figures, in terms of, are they going to go with plastic, or are they going to go with a fabric soft good component? Now, of course, for jackets, when there is a lot of small details, I feel like Hasbro has to make it in plastic, even though that does add a lot of bulk and a lot of restriction for the articulation of the figure underneath. We've got a lot of detail here. Now, this is just absolutely fantastic. We've got this kind of textured light colored stripe that has sort of a ribbed texture to it that I can feel when I'm running my fingernail over it, and it is painted a lighter tone color. It's kind of like a trim around the outside of the jacket that comes around and just kind of terminates here and kind of would go into the hood there, because of course we've got that laid flat. But this is really nice. Hoods are tricky. I always like hoods on soft goods like Jedi cloaks and stuff like that, but fabric, when it's sewn in small sort of ways, sometimes it just sort of fits like a big round sort of volume around the head. It doesn't sort of drape with a heaviness that you do for a sort of live action. So sometimes plastic is a little bit better, because we get this really sort of flat, close to the body fit that is a little bit more true to the garment that we see on screen. And there is some fantastic, there's even a really subtle texture to this, which is really nice. If we can see some of those costume stitching details coming in there as well. We've got ripples for the fabric, of course, being sort of wrinkled there. Really nice. You can see that sort of bunching up around at the collar there. The sleeves themselves are quite flat. There's not as much, sometimes on certain characters we get these sort of deep sort of creases, so it looks like, you know, the fabric's kind of really bending at the elbows, but jackets are a little bit trickier. They don't crease in quite the same ways because they're made of sort of big draping fabric sections. So we've got a much smoother sleeve here. I do really like the way that it's tight with the articulation here at the back when those arms are fully aligned. That's very, very minimal there. And we can see those sort of seam lines there of the original sort of costume. And if I twist the arm out to the side, we've got this really interesting sort of split here in those big sleeves to show the garment sort of jacket sleeve there underneath, which is much more fitted. And of course we can see his fingerless gloves that he is also wearing there as well. But it does look a little bit odd. I know that's not an awkward human position. Of course we can hold our arms like that, but generally I'm probably going to pose that a little bit more like that. I think that looks really cool though. And we can see we have those same details here on the other hand as well, with that really cool seam coming up here just to the side of that articulation point, so it's not getting lost there in the details. And we can see that same color of his sort of jacket worn underneath coming through there with the sleeve. And then those, I think they're black, just black fingerless gloves, which again have some texture there as well. We've even got a bit of a seam line running along the top of that inner sleeve, which is just fantastic. Looks really cool. And I have to say, you know, sometimes when you get your figures out of the box for the first time, they are really stiff and they want to fight with you. I'm actually finding the arms on this one to actually be not too stiff in the way that they can move. I'm going to test out the full sort of range of motion in a little bit, but let's just move them towards the back so I can just slip this sort of vest down a little bit, because I just want to have a look at some of this internal detail here as well. So ignoring the articulation at the shoulders, because I've bent the arms all the way back, we can see the sort of the jacket or shirt that he wears underneath here, which of course we've got the sort of buttons and everything hidden in classic Star Wars fashion. We've got some extra little stitching details here coming up to the collar, and we've got some brown leather suspenders which are sculpted on. Of course they are plastic here and they are sculpted on the body. They don't move. I do note that it looks like the painting for them stops at the shoulder. You can see there that they're sculpted kind of running onto the back, but the paint is only applied up to that center seam on the shoulder there. That paint doesn't continue on to the back section. You can just kind of see that in there, which, you know, a little bit of a cheat, but considering we're not really going to take the jacket off, we never even see the shoulder seam, so I can kind of understand why that might be hidden there. So moving on a little bit more with the jacket, while we've got those arms out of the way, we've got a big side split up here, almost to the waist here in terms of where we are going up to the belt. It's got a little bit of that sort of circular top to try and avoid splits there. I am always careful, but sometimes that little circular end there doesn't completely eliminate the little tendency for little splits there. So I am generally very careful with these splits because I don't want that to kind of go further than intended there. We've got these really deep pockets here on the front, which is kind of interesting there. And again, another big pocket sculpted here. We've got some details here on the chest as well, and we've got another split going up to that sort of midline waist seam there. And here on the back, I think it's kind of interesting that we can see that the jacket itself looks like it has a sort of a split for a sort of movement, but there isn't actually a split in the plastic. This is fully flat and fully sort of all together. So that is going to restrict any kind of leg movement a little bit more towards the back. Generally, we're a bit more worried about sort of knee action to the front, and these do move out of the way. So I'm not too worried about how we're going to get sort of movement with the legs moving forward. But this much flat plastic with no split down that center, that's going to be an issue. But I do like the way that this is sculpted. That does look like a fabric jacket, just kind of shrunken down. I can sort of see like the tiny little stitches, the detail, the subtle texture here. We've even got sort of little stitch details around here at the bottom. That's really nice. And just the overall sort of finish of this, just it looks like a jacket in miniature, which is what you would expect for a Star Wars toy. Really nice. We just got these sort of large articulation points at the front, but I'm hoping that when we move the arms around, that's going to start to disappear. So continuing on, I'm just going to move the arms up. We're doing a little bit of articulation testing here, but it's easier to get a look at the inside. So now we've got a full proper look at the inside of the jacket. No details here, as we would expect, nothing to really see there, but we can see these huge big pants. So they are sort of, we've got a brown about here, of course, attached to those suspenders. And then we've got these sort of big, they kind of balloon out a little bit here at the knees before coming and sort of tucking in at these sort of strapped sections. We can see that they kind of are sort of tightened here with these straps around and sort of the mid-lower leg here, and then we've got the sort of boots that come up above the ankle here. So this is where a lot of the weight of the figure is coming from, because of these thick pants here. That have sort of a lot of weight to them, and we can see the interesting sort of articulation there. We've kind of got these sort of spoon shape pieces here at the front. I really like the drape of these pants. It must be really tricky when they look at sort of wider pants. You notice this on the live action Ahsoka. She has similar kind of pants that kind of flow out away from the body, and trying to find articulation when clothing is not tight to the body and tight to the joints has got to be tricky, because of course the knee is such an important part for movement in humans and action figures. So when something is so wide as this, it's really hard to sort of do a typical sort of knee movement here. So I'm really keen to see how well that is going to move, and more importantly for me personally, how that's going to look moving the knees. And I really like the details on his boots. He has such incredible detail, some really unique boots here. So we've got some interesting kind of attachment points, some kind of buckling and straps around at the ankles here, just below those straps on his pants there as well. And then we've got all these straps and buckles over the top of his toes there. Really interesting, just playing around with the articulation there. They do move quite nicely. Sometimes the ankles on these figures can be quite tight. This one's a little bit tighter. That one's got a bit more of a click to it. This one, very smooth. I can move that one backwards and forwards so you can see that detail on the top of the surface there. Very dark. I'm not sure if it's a true black or dark gray, but it is very dark. I think it might be, because of course we've got the black on the gloves here. This feels like a black, so that might be a black as well. It's a little bit hard to tell, but overall I think it's a really cool look. I love the stern expression. He had such a fantastic monologue in the series, and I think they've done a really good job of both capturing Stellan Skarsgård's likeness in the art on the packaging and for the figure here as well. That is really cool. So we've got some fantastic detailing here. Of course, he's a slightly older character, so they've got character to their face, little bits to sort of replicate there. And we've got that fantastic digital printing for the eyes, of course. And then we've got this really sort of interesting paint job for the hair. It's not quite a white, it's sort of a yellow tinted sort of cream, and then we've got this interesting sort of much more yellow toned sort of highlight over it, which really brings out the texture of the hair, which is quite nice. And we've got a pretty good job painting along the hairline, because if the hair is short, Hasbro generally sculpts it as part of the head rather than a separate piece sort of attached on. So this is fully painted sort of right up. We can see just a tiny bit of that hair texture just above the ear, so we can see that that is part of the sculpture, not stuck on, because we would have a hard sort of line around the ears that we could be able to tell. And it comes all the way down there in the back, and I find that his head does actually move very freely. That was something I noticed when I was trying to straighten up his neck piece there. His head does move very well, so we'll be able to get some really good sort of angles there for posing the figure very shortly. So let's fully test out the movement here. So I've already done a lot of sort of movement on the sleeves. You can just sort of see some of those articulation points when I move the arms all the way up, and I'm quite impressed with how well I can get the arms to go all the way up. Sometimes the jackets, if we have pieces that kind of go over, sort of extending beyond the body, it can really limit where the arms go, but we can get a pretty good range of motion. We can get the arms pretty well up, getting a little bit of limitation there just because of the width of the jacket across the shoulders there, but we can get that pretty well. And they do sort of rotate around pretty nicely, and that's about as close to the body as they want to get. So we've got that sort of slightly wider, less close to the body. But let's check out these elbows. So we could see when he came out of the box, his arms were kind of twisted a little bit, and they do move. Now, one of the things that I was fairly certain we'd discover is things start to look a little bit odd when you sort of twist them and rotate them, because we start getting all of these beautiful sort of draping shapes, and then we go and sort of cut them in awkward ways. So tipping the arm in towards the body like that, it starts to look like a big gauntlet rather than a sleeve, because we've interrupted the drape of the fabric there. So that's complicated. I know that must be tricky for sort of Hasbro to try and figure that out. It looks a little less clunky if we keep in sort of one line. So if we just bend at the elbow, just do like that. So we just kind of get a little bit of a cut in here, but we've still got this line being maintained, and I think that that looks fine. Of course, the jacket the sleeve might not sit exactly the same position if we were to actually just move the elbow up, because of course it's kind of rising with the hand. It might fall down because we've got this split here in it, but I think that that works pretty well. And it is a tricky limitation when it comes to sculpting, as to how do you make something move when it is that big compared to sort of the normal skinny elbows of human characters wearing a much more sort of fitted to the body garment. But overall, I think that's about what I would expect in terms of trying to make all of those angles work and look well. Looks awkward when you tip them to the side. It starts to look a little bit funny, but if we keep in a straight line, it looks great. So I'm curious to see what kind of articulation he has if I just move his arms out of the way at the midline, because he's got a shirt on. So we don't have the sort of articulation on a lot of armored characters like troopers and stormtroopers and that. We've kind of got a articulation point just under, or sort of at the point of the chest armor to the abdomen. But his shirt goes all the way down to his pants. So we've only got this one spot here where it's really going to hide there. And I get the feeling, just based on holding this figure, he does not like twisting to the side. I can twist him to the right a little bit. There is a weird resistance. Sorry, when I turn him to his right, there's a weird resistance, and I can just get him. It's very tight though. It's not a free movement. Yeah, I can get a little bit more of sort of a side-to-side wiggle, and I do actually get a reasonable amount of front and back movement. That's more what I like. I find front and back really important for getting balance. So I'm glad that I can really move that around. You can see that because I've been moving him around, I've kind of twisted that neck piece. It kind of wants to keep moving to that side. So I'm probably going to have to adjust that later. But doing a bit of a grip and with the fingernails, you can sort of slowly encourage it back to straight. But let's test out. I'm really glad that that does move backwards and forwards, because yeah, the jacket is going to be a balance possible problem. So let's go over the articulation of the legs, because that's what I'm really curious about. I know I say that I don't really get too adventurous with the posing, but I still like to see the articulation. It's often sort of a bit interesting to see, especially when we've got legs that aren't, he is a human, but the legs, especially these pants, are just shaped very differently to the sort of the standard pants that we get on Black Series Star Wars figures. So I'm really curious to see how much range of movement that I'm going to be able to get from this. So let's start out with a pretty typical one. Let's move forward. And that's actually quite high. I thought maybe the size around the hips here might mean that that might be a bit more restricted, but that's actually a pretty good range. We could get into a sitting position. It looks a little bit awkward because of course the jacket's just hanging straight down, but that's actually a pretty good angle there. Now, of course, we're going to start to get a little bit different if we go out to the side, because we've got this jacket in the way. And I know it has a split, but I don't want to split it wide because I don't want to damage that at the top and potentially sort of split the plastic beyond where it is supposed to stop. So let's go. Okay, I can get to about there, and then I feel like I'm putting a lot of pressure on that. So that's actually pretty good, really, considering we've got this big plastic cloak jacket in the way there. Okay, and let's test the other side, make sure that's about the same. Ooh, yeah, about there. Wow, yeah. That's pretty cool. Just carefully watching that split there. You can see the angle there. I'm probably not going to stress that any further. And I do find that the hip joins, you can kind of see them clearly there. They move quite nicely. I'm not fighting with them. You can kind of see how that looks if I pull that jacket back. You can see in there, that's actually moving quite nicely. Sometimes they can really fight you. Okay, let's test out the knees. I'm fascinated by these knees. I know I said they're very similar to sort of the big Ahsoka pants. So I'm hoping, okay, let's see. You can see just by lifting the jacket up a little bit, we can see the articulation on the knees there in the back and just the sculpting on the back of the pants. I forgot to show that earlier there, just sort of all hidden underneath the jacket. Because of course you're not really ever going to see that when your figure's on display, but it's just interesting to see. So getting that jacket out of the way is actually a little bit tricky. Trying to just bend the knees there. Okay, so I'm going to do both of them while I'm here. Oh, that one's very stiff actually. I know it can be really different depending on which, figure you get at the store. Some really fight you when you're trying to move the joints, and others are quite, oh, that's very stiff. Okay, I was able to get them to about the same level there. You can kind of see what the knee looks like there. It's fairly smooth from the front, and you can see about that angle there. Not quite as tight. It's not quite hitting here at the back. I think it's just, this one is very tight. I was able to get this one up a little bit higher. You can see here that that part of the back of the pant is hitting here on the back of the calf. So I'm not going to get this one any tighter with the movement there. I'm not really going to pose him in a kneeling position, but just to show the sort of the knee there. Oh, this one is really tight, I have to say. Very tight. There we go. And this one was better. Yeah, that one's definitely better. And also, just of course, I just realized we don't have that sort of high thigh articulation point where we can rotate the legs around. So I can obviously get a little bit of, oh, actually, there it is. I couldn't see that on the underside. I was looking at the back thinking, I can't see that articulation point. It's hidden. It's there. I couldn't see that. What? Wow, that's really hidden. I couldn't see that in the back. Wow, okay, there it is. Wow, that's really hidden all the way in there. It's kind of got like a, sort of like a section that's kind of hiding that, because I was looking at it, because some things, like the Ahsoka one, you just see the straight line, and as soon as you rotate it to the side, it cuts in to the sort of the draped, sculpted detail of the pants. That's a really interesting way to do that. I thought maybe we weren't going to have that articulation point on this particular figure, but rotating it around, that's really interesting. That's fun. Cool. So you can still rotate it around. We still have this articulation kind of moving with the leg. You just kind of expose a little bit of that under piece there. Really interesting. Cool. I thought, we're not going to have that articulation point because I couldn't see it. Even from the side, I thought usually you can kind of peek it in the back a little bit. That's a little bit hidden. I couldn't see that. That's fun. That's one of the fun things where I like to spend, just a little bit longer going over all of my Star Wars toys. You find things, interesting sort of elements as you really sort of play with them. So of course we can twist here at the knees to the sides. It does look a little bit awkward. We've got the articulation point sort of pointing there, but of course we can rotate around. I find just being able to give all those small little adjustments in the legs really helps balance figures, especially if you're not using stands. So just before, when I was showing the detail for the boots, I've noticed that his ankles are actually really, really good. They are just like all these little small adjustments. I can sort of rock to the sides. I can do front and back. Sometimes they really, really fight me. And I'm always really worried because it's one of the smaller joins on a Black Series figure. And of course, if you manage to break something on the ankles, your character's never going to stand up. So I'm always very careful with the articulation joints and the ankles on these figures. But these ones are really nice. I've got a good range of motion. I can get the sort of side to side movement. This one's a little bit stiffer than the other side, but I've got that there. So hopefully I'll be able to get a really good balanced position from him. So we do have articulation at the hands, but because of the shape of the jacket, I don't know that we're really going to get that much movement, nor do I sort of really want to, because it's going to take, we're going to get a little bit of rotation, I think, but I'm not sure that we're going to get much else. We've got I think you might be able to see that. That's just the tiniest little front and back movement. Because of the jacket, it's just going to be in the way. So I don't know that we're necessarily going to really utilize that much. But we can rotate it around. We can see the shape of the hand. We've got a pretty much a sort of a classic grip like this. I like the position of the thumb. It's kind of gesturing a little bit up there. It's kind of interesting. And then of course for the main weapon hand we've got a little bit more of a trigger finger on this one. And we can see that thumb pressing down. The trigger finger is separate from the other 3 fingers, which is good because we do have a trigger guard on our blaster pistol there. So let's see, this hand, of course, this one's going to rotate as well. It's a little bit harder to grip. It's very close to the jacket sort of sleeve here. So I can twist that one around, but it is very tight there, which I'm hoping means that the blaster pistol is going to fit in here well. Sometimes the weapons end up hitting a lot on the decorations and sort of just sculpted costume parts here. So I'm hoping that the blaster pistol, hopefully I'm going to be able to find a position that's going to work with this big sleeve without it sort of getting in the way, and I can still get it into his hand there, because I really do want to test out the accessories in his hands. But yeah, a little bit limited there on the hands because of course we've just got these big sleeves, but that is going to be part of the costume detail, and that's not really anything Hasbro is going to be able to change much. So now that I've gone and twisted him all which way, okay, he is standing up. I was curious to see if I'm going to be really wrestling to get him into a standing position, but he's actually fairly sturdy. He's not too bad. It doesn't look like I'm having to tip him around in an odd angle to get him to balance. That's very good. He does have good sturdy boots. I find sometimes a good indicator for how well a character is going to stand is how sturdy their boots look. So that's really nice. I'm glad he is not a tricky one to stand up. That's really exciting because for me, I want my characters to be able to stand up. I'm not doing toy photography, where we've got fishing line and all kinds of little, hidden little extras to help pose them in action poses. I just want my figures to stand and be balanced and look cool on my display shelf. So I'm very glad for that. Just going to have to rotate that neck piece. I'm not sure why mine wants to keep rotating around. You can see it's kind of migrated back again. So I'm going to have to just sculpt there a little bit, sort of just with my fingers, just kind of gently get him back in there so that neck piece is lined up with his shirt, because I want that to look straight. I know I could get it straight, but somehow just moving him all around has moved that again. Okay, so even though he's very sturdy, I don't want him to accidentally fall over, so I'm just going to lie him there in the background. So let's go over the 2 accessories that we have. So we have got this really small little blaster pistol. Of course, it is scaled well to the hand, and we've got this really nice metallic finish on it. It's not a brilliant silver, but it's not the darkest gunmetal I've seen. It's really nice sort of mid gunmetal. And it's not quite a white, it's a light gray paint there for the grip, which is on the other side there as well. It's a really nice detail. It's very small, and we can see that we've got an enclosed trigger guard, which I'm hoping won't be too hard to get into his extended finger, because it always looks good if you can get the Black Series figures to really hold their accessories. Also helps to make sure they don't accidentally lose them while they're standing on your shelf. I don't want to lose the accessories for my figures. And we've got this really interesting sort of stick, this interesting sort of, it's like a short baseball bat in sort of interesting little ways. So we've got this kind of ridged section here, and then we've got a straighter section which has kind of like a sculpted wood grain on it. It's really small, it's kind of hard to show. And then we've got a little bit of grey paint here and here, or it's made out of grey plastic, and this paint is painted brown. It's a little bit hard to tell sometimes with accessories. I really like just the overall sort of sculpting details here. So as indicated on the box art, this will come apart, and we can see that we have an interesting twisty sort of a blade here. It's kind of an interesting, slightly kind of like a corkscrew type shape. Really interesting there. It's kind of rippled. So that looks like that is made in a grey plastic, and this, now that I can sort of see it from the cut edge, that looks like a grey plastic. So that's probably a brown paint for that sort of grip there. But that is really fun. So instead of it being sort of a flat bladed weapon, it's more of a circular one. So you can see we have sort of a circular tube for that sort of attachment point there. So that's really fun, sort of little hidden weapon there. So looking at his coat, I'm always looking for, if there are accessories, if there are holsters or any way to sort of hold the accessories on the character other than just in their hands. So looking at the top of these pockets, they are solid. There's no gap there. That is just a sculpted pocket there. It's completely flat across the top. There is no indents there, and the same on the other side. So looking in the interior, when I looked in before, I wasn't necessarily looking for it, but I didn't spot any kind of sections. I can feel how thick the plastic is in parts when we've got these sculpted parts on the outside and some of these sort of sections around here. Some of the parts of the jacket are actually quite thick. And this one here in particular, that's quite thick. But it doesn't look like we've got any kind of pockets that perhaps may not exist on the original costume, but maybe Hasbro has given us somewhere to put to these weapons. But it doesn't look like it. I know that, you know, he's probably trying to be a little bit more covert, sort of hiding his weapons. I'm going to just quickly slip his arms behind him and see if I can move this back, because I want to just quickly check the back of his belt. And I'm hoping he's going to sort of play with me here a little bit without stressing that out. Okay, because I just want to check his belt. You can see the costume details. The paint is actually, the belt is painted all the way around, I should say. If I can lift that up, we can kind of see under there. I don't think there's anything on this to attach a weapon. There's no pegs on these weapons, but I just thought I'd just have a quick little look and make sure that there isn't anywhere to put them. So yes, and most of the time Star Wars characters have a holster of some sort if they are carrying a blaster, but he does not. So I'm guessing it is concealed in his coat. So that is a little bit tricky if you don't necessarily want to have all of the accessories. He could hold this in one hand and the blaster in another, but if you want him to hold this, you're probably going to have to put this somewhere or have them in two different hands. So if you're utilizing all of the accessories, you're going to end up with one piece that's not going to fit anywhere, which is a little bit tricky. So I'm going to start out with this bladed weapon because it is just so unique. I love that twisty shape. It's really cool. So this is going to be a little bit tricky because I feel like I'm going to come up against this a little bit, and to be honest, his arms do actually move a lot, which can help for posing, but when you're trying to get accessories in, you don't want their arms moving around a lot. So just going to see how easy it is going to be to get this in, because I don't have a lot of length to work with here. Okay, and just, there we go. That looks pretty cool. So he holds that really well. Little bit of a push to get that through his hands because we've got all those ridges that are kind of catching on his fingers, but that looks really cool. You can see how he's holding that. Really nice. Cool. Okay, so curious to see if his other hand can actually hold the grip, and then we'll test out that blaster. Oh, I think this one might be a bit too tight, you know. That one might be one that I'll test out later, because sometimes you can kind of bend the fingers back, you know, very quickly, and then they kind of fold back in. These are quite hard fingered plastic. That's not budging. So I might be able to get that in there, but that's a very tight hand. I'm not entirely sure. And I don't have a lot of space around because of these sleeves. I'll just give it a quick go, see if I can get that in there. No, yeah, I'm probably going to wreck that. Not sure that that's really worth it trying to get it in there. I kind of wish that Hasbro would kind of sculpt the hands to be a little bit more sort of purpose built for the accessories that we're given. If he's holding that one, I kind of want him to hold this in the hand like on the box, you know, where he's sort of pulling it out from the sort of staff section here. But I might be able to get that in. And I'll certainly keep trying, but I kind of wish I didn't have to risk damage to either the accessory or the figure itself. You know, I don't want to risk damaging things. I've come across this before with certain Hasbro action figures. I felt like, and unfortunately I have on a rare occasion, broken a piece trying to simply put accessories in where they're supposed to go. So I am very anxious about it. But of course, we've got a trigger finger. Let's test out this blaster rifle. It is very skinny. You can kind of see there, it's a very skinny one. So I'm hoping that that is going to work well with his hand. And again, kind of got to hold his arm in place. I'm hoping this is going to go in with not too much fuss because it is narrow. So let's see if I can get that in under his hands there, and we'll get that trigger finger lining up. It's a little less easier than I thought because his finger is not lining up, and if the finger isn't going to go in that trigger guard, then it's going to just block. Yeah, this is tricky. His finger is kind of hitting against the blaster instead of going in there. Okay, yeah, I'm twisting his hand everywhere. Okay, I'm going to spend a minute because I've got to do this really carefully. I want to get this posed into his hand properly. So I just spent a couple of careful minutes and I was able to get the accessories into the hand. Of course, they should be able to, but I like it if it's not quite a fight. So I'll start off with the blaster pistol. You can see that the figure does fit it there. The finger is kind of in the trigger guard. It kind of wants to keep sort of popping out. It's not as secure in place as I thought it would because of how sort of extended that finger looks. He does hold it very tightly. You can kind of see the fingers there along the edges of the grip. It's very secure. He's not going to drop it. And I think it's interesting that there's no way to kind of store that accessory on the figure. There's no pockets or anything like that to hide it, either on the exterior of the jacket or on the underside. But he looks pretty cool. Of course, the jacket does start to look a little bit funny, particularly here when we put the arms up, but I think he looks pretty cool holding it. And you can see that I did manage to get that sort of sheath, sort of pole section there for that bladed weapon into the other hand. It did take a bit of time and the use of a few implements to kind of pull those fingers out. I have to do that really carefully. I'm really nervous about potentially damaging the fingers on a figure, but just enough to kind of open them up a little bit and manage to get that in there. And you can see that the fingers compared to the thumb are in a wider position than they were naturally. So he's definitely gripping onto that. The fingers are kind of going to close a little up if I take that out, but I really wanted him to hold it because if that's in that hand, then I can choose to kind of put this section in and I can have him holding both accessories, so I don't need to worry about potentially losing track of the accessories. I do like it when we can sort of, I like having my figures holding the accessories that they came with. I know that's not always the case, but sometimes it just sort of makes for just an interesting pose and a display, and then I don't need to keep immaculate records of where all of these spare accessories are and which figures they match up with. And because this is just such a unique weapon, I kind of wanted him to be able to hold it there, even if it's not making as much sort of in-world sense for him to be holding a both like this. I think they look really cool. I just wish that the hands were just a little bit easier to work with in terms of holding the accessories, but he's all ready to go. He looks really cool, and I'm really happy with how well he stands. That was always a little bit of a concern when I saw that big plastic jacket and how heavy he was. It's fantastic. I can pose his arms in different ways and he still feels pretty steady. Got a little bit of a wobble with him. I'll just probably spend a little bit of time just really straightening him up, you know, correcting that neckline piece there and just getting him all on display. He was such a standout character on the Andor series. Of course, he had to be in the action figure lineup. I'm really hoping to see more figures and merchandise of this fantastic character. There have not been very many Andor series figures in Hasbro's vintage collection line, and barely any in the Funko Pop vinyl range, which is odd. Usually Funko get out there first, they get lots made. They were really light when it came to Andor, and I'm really wishing there was more merchandise from this fantastic show. But now that I have Luthen all out, I really wanted to bring in the Mon Mothma Black Series figure as well, just to sort of see them side by side, because of course we do see them interact quite a lot on the show, even if they're not necessarily wearing these two outfits. This one is sort of Luthen's more sort of action outfit compared to his robes that he wears on Coruscant, especially when meeting with Mon Mothma in his antique shop. And you can see the scale of the figures. Of course, Mon Mothma shouldn't be as tall or sort of as bulky as a Luthen here, and it's really fun to see these two side by side. I'm really looking forward to getting more figures from this show, and of course Series 2. I'm really hoping we get a lot of fantastic figures from Series 2. I know that Hasbro has revealed the incredible Deirdre Mero in both the Black Series line and Vintage Collection lines. She was another standout character. I'm really looking forward to adding her to my Hasbro Star Wars collection lines, because of course there were just some really cool characters and this show was really, really cool. So these two were both in blind boxes from Hasbro's plastic-free packaging line. So I opened this one up a little while ago because I thought she was just really cool. I love Mon Mothma. Of course, she appears in all sorts of Star Wars series, but I just loved seeing more of her personal story in the Andor series. Of course, we see her in the Rebellion in a lot of different movies and series, but this was more, we see her home life, we see more about her personally, and I thought that was fantastic. So I opened her up the moment I got her, but I was hoping to have a few more Andor figures to really build out a display. Sadly, they're still coming out very slowly, so instead of waiting until I had more, I've decided to go through and open them up. So I've got a couple of other Andor series figures, I've got a couple of Black Series, and a couple of Vintage Collection that I'm going to be opening up this week as well, because I just want to get them all out and get them on display so I can celebrate one of my favorite Star Wars series, the fantastic Andor series, and I'm really, really looking forward to Series 2. So they look fantastic together, and I'm really happy with this Luthen Rael figure. Fantastic sculpting. I think the likeness is really cool. He comes with some interesting accessories. Of course, it must be hard, I think, sometimes for Hasbro to choose some of the outfits. I was kind of wishing that I had him in his sort of antiquities dealer robes, but I know that's less conducive to sort of accessories and action and things like that. So I understand why they did him in this version, so that we can, you know, have him posing with a blaster and some weapons, because that's a little bit more, I guess, play friendly in terms of having things to do. Poor Mon Mothma, she doesn't really hold that much in the series, so that Black Series figure doesn't come with any accessories, but I don't mind that for her. I think this is a really cool figure. Big plastic cape, he stands well. I can hear his voice. I always think that's fun when you can look at a figure and you can hear some of their most memorable lines, because the faces just look like they do on screen. That's always a sort of a big win in my book. It's sort of one of my sort of little tells of a great figure is when you can sort of really, you can play the scenes in your head and hear the voices, and I can definitely see that and hear that with this figure. Really, really cool. This has been fun. A little bit of stress there with the weapons and fitting in the hands, but other than that, really cool. I kind of wish I hadn't waited so long to get him out of the box, but I did now, and he looks great. Now I've got some others to open, so I can build up a little bit of an Andor set display there with my figures. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today as I opened up another Star Wars collectible, checked out the details and accessories, and had a lot of fun celebrating the Andor series. I hope you have a wonderful morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are in the galaxy, and let's hang out again very soon for more Star Wars fun. May the Force be with you. If you're a Black Series fan, I've also unboxed the Bix Kayleen figure. That video is linked here in case you haven't already seen it, as well as a whole Black Series unboxing playlist. This is the way.